Let's see. So we should
Wait,
technically be live, but let me go on YouTube and check if we are or not.
yeah, like put the link in the.
So yeah, you're live. I got the YouTube notification.
Yeah, I wonder whether the audio works though. That's what I'm worried about. So
Yeah, let me have a look.
yeah,
Audio test. Audio test.
Testing, one, two,
it's working.
three.
Yeah, it's working.
I had to get up at 1 a.m. It's 1 a.m. where I am, and I'm tired.
So yeah, that's always a problem.
All right, so we are live, and we are going to be talking about Gasaraki. So,
possibly the most unique mecha anime of the 90s? Certainly up there.
yes,
I would say that like out of all the mecha, like because during the 90s, like the mecha genre was getting incredibly stagnant, and Gasaraki is one of those mechas that is like it didn't change the game like say or become as popular as say like Neo Genesis Evangelion did, but it definitely is. It is definitely of that thing like a mecha that tries to do something different.
Very different.
right. So I Tour Agent, did you know anything about Gasaraki before Sieg mentioned it? No.
No, I had no idea. All I knew is that Fox thought it was based, so that's always a good sign.
Oh yeah, Fox said that he thought that it was based. So
It kind of is.
yeah, it kind of is. So I think
I mean, this show has quite a few banger quotes and scenes, so yes, it is kind of based.
What about you, Balgandam? How did you find Gasaraki, if you can remember?
I basically heard about it through like the Anime Snob, and I decided to check it out. It's done by a director I quite like, because I do like some of this dude's works because he just has like this attention to detail and shit. Yeah, and so I was like watching this, and this is like, well, this is a really political thriller mecha show, and then it gets into some really other interesting avenues, like aside from the Japanese nationalism meme, like it gets into some very interesting subjects. I do think the show itself plays like the subtle card a bit too much, but it's definitely a very unique experience. Like watching it, like just in general, I thought it was a very interesting ride. Also, that fucking opening,
It is
yeah.
right.
It sucks you in, and that's something I found throughout the anime. Well, I was.
So does the ending. Like the ending in OP is fucking great. Like I actually listen to them every now and then. Like it's so good. Like it just sucks you in.
It very much
Sugar.
it almost feels at times there's this constant motif of heartbeats and sort of the beating heart going out of control, both in the story and like in the imagery and what you hear and the soundtrack. And
yeah, like here's the thing: when it goes like the opening goes like dust, you see like the mechs moving slowly, like with the heartbeat. It's very it's like this is what I'm talking about when it comes to like detail. Like the show is the director is probably some sort of like Japanese artist or something. Like the amount of detail and like, I mean, this thing has camera panning so detailed. I originally thought it was CGI. Like you would think it's CGI, but all hand drawn.
From what I was reading, there were actually there was Ryosuke Takahashi, who was the original concept and director guy. There was Goro Taniguchi, who go on to do.
Yeah, it's Takahashi. That's who I'm talking about. Like that dude just has a penchant for like this dude's mecha designs are very fucking detailed, which we'll get into later.
Yes.
So, what about you, Sig? How did you find Gasaraki?
As I recall, I was actually looking through Goro Taniguchi's work, and I came across it. Because, I mean, other people don't like it. I did like Code Geass. The only other Takahashi show I've watched in full is SBT Leisner, which is similar in the very strong anti-American views it has, very anti-war views. But again, that one comes at it from a more Japanese pacifistic perspective, whereas this comes at it from, I guess you could say, a slightly more militant, but not excessively so, perspective. One of, well, we must get the hegemon to respect ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, do you get the feeling that I mean, did you feel like the director or here cares about the message as much? Because I read the interviews as that were in the torrent, the most seeded torrent for Gasaraki, and
Yeah.
most of the stuff that they were talking about was about the mech design, about the stuff that they,
Yes.
the technical stuff, like for example, the effects, basically the special effects, like how they used a piece of glass with water on it to make a steamy looking cockpit scene.
Yeah, to make it look like a guy was actually getting frozen over, and it is kind of freaky looking.
But I didn't hear. They didn't really say anything about what they thought about the politics. To be fair, I only skimmed through it because I don't.
Oh, I can answer that very well. Japanese people in general don't usually talk about like their politics. Like here's the thing: if they talk about their politics, it's either like so. If I was to say talk to a Japanese person on politics, it's because I brought up the subject. Nine times out of 10. So it's possibly like, here's the thing: it's possibly like a cultural thing that maybe he does care, but he's not going to bother.
Yeah, there's in the archived ADV stuff. I actually posted the discussion of it. Let me get it up.
Yeah, you did post it. Yes.
Goro Taniguchi said the attitude of Mr. Takahashi, who was born during World War II, is fundamentally different from the attitude of those who were born during Japan's rapid expansion. Conservative equals evil is too simplistic. And you do see some of that naturally coming through, I think, in Nishida in the show, where he is very much the one that believes that Japan's economic excess has led it to devour
adopt
virtues.
I think I can explain this. Like, you know, the Japanese, like a lot of the people who grew up during like the Japanese economic boom, they kind of viewed like, this is just kind of like my amateur view of it, so I don't have all the facts, but they kind of, there is this sense of like materialism that sort of this materialism that kind of overtook the traditional culture, if that makes any sense. Yes. Like you have the people who grew up during post-war Japan, you know, they had some hard times and rough shit, but they got over it. But you got the people after that, you know, like the boomers or the Gen Xers and the millennials and you know, the people who are like, you know, the otaku no video types, you know, those types. They came up around during, you know, this economic boom where like money was literally growing on trees, and you know, people were calling it the economic miracle, and this was where Japan was going to be. You know, instead of this traditional country, they were replacing their traditions with materialism.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that's something that's happened universally to nearly every country, but you're right, it was very stark for Japan because they were literally a bombed out ruin. And they got to rebuild basically every city they had and just started concentrating. And yeah, there were so many. Between the Meiji Restoration had already changed a lot of their culture. And then add to that the
dramatically, like like the Meiji Restoration changed them so dramatically. Like they industrialized in the span of 30 years at a growth that not anyone else had seen. And
Yes.
obviously they did it through bloodshed too. Like they had like the samurai rebellions and all this shit. And if you read a bit of like Fukuyama's one of the brain children between the Meiji Restoration. Well, he wasn't really one of the brain children, but like he was one of the influences of this in a way. Is Fukuyama. What was it, Yukichi Fukuyama or something? Like, if you read some of his works around that time, when the black ships came and shit like that, like there was rapid changes that even he was noticing too.
Mm-hmm.
So, Total Agent,
Yeah.
what did you think? Did you like it? Did you find it boring? Or how did you?
I believe the series slumped in the middle. You know, as so many series do. That's kind of to be expected. The series starts off quite being quite opaque, and it's definitely something that benefits from the 3 episode rule. After you've seen 3 episodes of the show, I was sold. So yeah, I would definitely advise applying the 3 episode rule to this show.
Yeah, because isn't the first episode just Yushiro dancing?
Yes, it is.
Dancing in order to
Yeah.
bring about the cataclysm, the terror.
Yeah,
And by the way, that first episode, when I was like watching it, I'm just like, I got a lot of that like Shinto, Buddhism, mysticism vibes. Like there's the taiko drums going off, there's the like that fucking chanting in the distance, like the Shinto priest, the incense going around. Like it paints this very like, what the fuck is going on here? Because like I know a little bit about Japanese culture. I thought like, this is really weird. Is this some sort of like local family tradition? Like he's dancing and shit with the mask and shit, and it's very specific. And I'm like, is this some sort of like traditional thing they do in the family? Is this some local thing? Like it immediately sucked me in of like, oh, what is going on here?
So, Biogundam, given that you found this through Snob, that anime Snob, so I'm sure I'm looking at Snob's review on AnimeDB on AnyDB, and I think you have seen the review.
Yes, I have.
What did you think of it?
I thought the review was crap.
Why?
It doesn't go into much detail and it doesn't really cover much of the subjects. It's just like, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks.
I mean, he says he claims that a lot of the people who praise this just do that because they like the premise. It makes them think. So
I'm pressing X to doubt. Yeah, I'm pressing X to doubt. Because here's the thing. You could like the premise of a show, but doesn't mean like you stay around. Like for example, what's a good there's like a couple of shows I've watched. I've gotten a few episodes, like I thought, oh, the premise is great, and then it continues on for a couple of episodes. I'm like, this is really shit, and I drop it. Like who the fuck watches shit?
Yeah. For me, most of my enjoyment of this series came from the action scenes. I thought they were just really well directed, right? If that's the correct word.
Yes.
Yeah, just because I think, as you said, there's just so much attention to detail that you actually, it's explained so well, or shown to you why these mechs are superior to a modern armor, for example, and you actually believe this new technology. So yeah, I really enjoyed all the action scenes. And
what's actually really great about the mecha designs is also like it feels like an actual mech. Like these robots feel heavy as they move and shit. And like I'm remember this one scene where they're trying to grapple in a building, and like the hooks, some of them like slip, and you see like rubble and the mech fall, like the mech kind of falling and trying to grip it in. And you've had all these like textile sounds. Like these mechs they look heavy, they sound heavy, they move heavy. They're a little bit like compared to say like a Gundam or the Nightmare frames from like Code Geass or any other mecha show. Like these robots feel realistic because they're prototypes. They feel like they are very mobile, but they're also quite clunky at the same time. Like you get the impression that this is like a work in progress. This is the first like bipedal mobile weapon platform system that humanity has created. It really feels like that.
Another
Yeah, the evil Illuminati organization symbol literally refers to their own robot as a fake, because this is just a stepping stone to what they are trying to accomplish. This is not truly what they want to reach yet.
So, another criticism which I've heard is that there's too much dialogue, there's talking and talking so much. Did you feel like that?
I think it could have been clear. It could have been cleaned up a bit. Um, a lot of the times, because I watched the Subversion, a lot of the times, a lot of the dialogue would sort of overlap. So you would have someone talking in the background about some random geopolitics while the plot was happening. And that was a little distracting, but it wasn't too bad. Like I would say mid-season when you get that slump, or at least for me, I sort of thought like the episodes like in the mid were kind of boring. The dialogue does get quite heavy. But it didn't break it for me.
Some of this is going to go over some people's head, like towards the end, Nishida and the rest are talking about the basics of international finance, and if you don't know what that is, or how it works, and how they refer to it as hot money, but now it would just be called money. How liquid digital money is, and if you don't get that, then you're going to be completely confused.
Do you think they did a good job of explaining it though?
Yeah,
I'm going to say no.
I think they explained what they need to explain. Here's
the thing. They do and they don't at the same time, because here's the thing. A lot of attention to detail, but here's the thing. If you have a background in that shit, then obviously you'll pick it up as like, oh yeah, this is relatively simple stuff. But for the uneducated viewer, it gives you an idea, but not the full picture. Like this is the type of show where if you have a background in certain things, like for example, if you know anything about Japanese culture or finance or geopolitics, like a lot of the stuff these characters are saying will make sense to you. It's like, I get it. Oh, I get it. But if you don't have that background, you're gonna be like, it's gonna be like nationalism, Japan, soul, democracy. Like,
I can see what. I can see what you're saying there. A lot of things in this show are sort of subversions to geopolitics normal. Right at the start, when they're fighting, or when the NATO is going to attack Belgistan, and you assume, oh well, NATO is obviously going to steamroll this like third world country, but this series actually subverts that, right? And it turns out that Belgistan is actually way more advanced than the NATO forces.
Although that's entirely thanks to the evil Illuminati.
Well, yes, but and that's explained. But I did appreciate that this series has this understanding, and it knows how to sort of surprise people who sort of understand how these things work. So, at least on a basic level. And that's kind of what interested me around the third episode. I just thought these things were kind of cool.
Belgistan is a definite shoe-in for Iraq. This show
it's
the invasion of Iraq.
It's just some like a generic Middle Eastern country.
And before the invasion of Iraq actually happened, there was some debate that Iraq had a fairly modernized air force, this or that. It wasn't. So there was some talk that, but like around the time this anime would have been making, that in such a scenario, Iraq could have put up a fight and made itself a serious threat. That didn't happen in reality. In reality, it was just the quote-unquote peacekeeping afterwards that was the real big fight.
Yes, and of course...
Yeah, because basically you have to fight with these guerrilla wars, because, how do you take on a foe that's way more superior than you? You chip away where they're weakest. I mean, Sun Tzu writes about, talks and writes about this, attack where your enemies is weak.
Yes.
what did you guys think in terms of presentation about the TV news
I think
programs?
they did an amazing job.
Yeah, it feels very much like it's just pulled straight out of some 90s old TV broadcast. So I guess you could say even to 2000s. It's too stylistically different from newscasts today, but that's more that's more a indictment of newscasts today than it is of the show.
I
It,
see.
it's very, very fits the tone. The one thing that sort of got to me is early on, there's a lot of times where the journalists are very, very questioning of the generals and their official line on the war, especially as it starts coming out, hey, this war isn't going perfectly. Hey, we started having massive casualties. And the press corps is very questioning and trying to do a good job.
Hey, what are these pictures of
And-
giant robots?
Yeah, and
I wonder what's
I
going on.
ironically thought that was the most unrealistic part of the show, but it is not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. There are quite a lot of fun elements to this show as well. Sort of nearing the front half, where you have the gang, sort of drawing through, drawing through the Middle East, picking up, sort of serving on main characters and things. I found that stuff I found that stuff pretty enjoyable, even though it wasn't really that important to the plot. So, anyway, and obviously the journalists who turn up in that sort of assault scene in Belgistan when they're sort of testing out the mechs. Yeah, but it obviously wasn't really that realistic. But yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it anyway. I don't really mind.
I heard some people criticize Gasaraki also because some people felt that the protagonist and some of the main character, or rather the people who you would assume that were the main characters, the teenagers or whatever, they were just spending a lot of time just feeling sorry for themselves until they were just plucked back in at the end for the resolution.
I mean, here's the thing. These are two teenagers who've never had the idea of a normal life. I mean, you got one dude who lives in an incredibly prestigious family, and you got like this chick who is kind of a doll in a way.
Yes. She's less of a doll than someone like, say, Ayanami Ray.
Actually, maybe doll's not a great word. Maybe puppet. Like she's
Yes,
a puppet.
that's a better word.
Yeah, puppet.
Yeah,
But basically,
and she silently resents that, and she knows that. But like Yushiro as well, that's what she's been her whole life, and she just sort of silently has been accepting that for some time.
Yes, I mean, I'm talking more in the sense that if you look at the promotional art, you will see Yushiro, that girl Mahiru, Miharu or whatever, and Yushiro's younger sister. But I mean, they don't really. They don't really. I mean, they do end up playing a role in the ending. But you know what I mean. It's like
that is definitely something that could throw some people for a loop, and I can't blame them if it makes them dislike the show a little bit, because the main character very much does play a backseat in the show. It is more or less mostly the characters in the background, the supporting characters who are starting all this political shit, that play the most major role, yet at the same time they do not play a major role at the start of the show. They only start to play it towards the middle.
yeah.
Which is going to throw some people for a loop.
Yeah, if I was to describe like the two main characters of the show, like main characters in air quotes, like it's almost like they are cogs in a far greater machine, because in most series, you'd have the in quite a few series, you'd have like the main character where he's like doing shit, or they're like, they're center stage. But in this show, yes, the main characters do play their part, and we see a lot of their perspectives. They are not the main focus. They are merely a cog in this greater machine.
Yes, it kind of felt a bit like, okay, they are doing this to appeal to teenagers or something. So teenagers are going to buy this. So we need to have a protagonist and a bunch of yeah.
I did see a interview with the art director, or rather the character designer, and he said that he did go for like sort of a more realistic design, but he didn't realize how stoic the show was going to end up being. And he said that if he did, he would have actually changed some of the designs somewhat, which I think they were fine, but that sort of goes to what you're talking about.
Right. So, Sieg, do you want to explain the basic plot?
Oh, sure. Bump the hard job on me.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to really.
So the show opens with a big dance in somewhere in Japan. This really esoteric dance, and what it's doing is it's big ceremony, people surrounding it. It causes these shockwaves and force fields and this ray of light down on the main character. And he gets a vision from the main other character, the main love interest. And all of a sudden she says, "Don't do this. You're going to bring back the terror." And he has a moment of doubt and he backs off. And then from that, we go into, as a side effect of that dance that they just did, a giant explosion went off in the middle of not Iraq. And of course, this immediately gets the United States involved. The United States goes, "Not Iraq has just tested a nuclear weapon. We have to do something and invade them now." I mean, okay, you'd think that would be risking nuking your own guys, but at the same time, this is U.S. Maybe they were quite aware that it's not a nuke, and they were just using it as a pretext. U.S. invades. The guys who were doing this dance, this great family called the Goa family, they are also, as part of this, they are developing this new giant robot, this new mecha testbed called the Tactical Armor. And in order to both test these actual weapons, as well as actually conduct data on why there was this secondary explosion all the way in Iraq, they managed to convince the Japanese PM to have a limited peacekeeping deployment and basically shred the Japanese constitution
in half.
Yeah, shred Article 2 or whichever part.
Yeah, because here's the thing: the article. So technically, officially, until recently, the Japanese self-defense force.
Still the case.
No, I thought that ended like a year or two ago. Like they now have officially an army.
No, I mean I could check, but I'm pretty sure that was a big thing they were pushing through, but never got through.
So what happened around 2 years ago, if not earlier, was that basically the Japanese were not allowed to take part in foreign adventures, like in Iraq. They were not properly allowed to take part in those things.
Yes, when America invaded and took over Japan in 1945, they forced in a constitutional provision that said Japan shall have no standing army. The self-defense force was allowed as a sort of official exception because of the threat of China, but
and the Korean War
and the Soviet Union.
War,
yes,
and the Soviet Union. but officially the Self-Defense Force is not an army. Officially, Japan cannot have an army, and so thus officially Japan cannot get involved in any foreign wars, no matter what.
But now it can if an ally of Japan is attacked or something like that. I think it can now. That's what
Okay.
happened 2 years ago. So
Oh, okay, that's
Uh,
possible.
Yeah. Also, I literally a couple of years ago, I read back that article. Is so the actual so here's the thing. Officially, the Self Defense Force is not an army, but it's actually an army, and now it's officially an army.
I don't know
Oh,
about
okay.
that. Yeah, but yeah.
We're being real fast and loose here. Anyways, so they managed to get the TAs in. They recover, and as part of this invasion of Iraq, the United States thinks, "Oh, we're going to take this over real easy." No, this absolutely mystical Illuminati-like organization called Symbol has been providing their own tactical armors to Iraq. And as a result of this, Iraq has been able to decimate the United States tank force. And it has been an absolute disaster for the United States. And eventually, the Japanese tactical armors actually meet with some of these Iraqi tactical armors while they're doing this research on the impact site as a result of Yushiro's dance. And they do manage to actually damage one, get some actual muscle fiber from it. They take the muscle fiber, they're going to study this. And this is where it really starts to display its own how powerful this Symbol organization is. Like, as soon as the war is over, Symbol decides that they're going to stop backing Iraq after a certain point, and they just sort of let Saddam Hussein die by coup d'etat. As soon as the Japanese are trying to take back this muscle fiber from the enemy TA, they all of a sudden get stopped. All these American forces are telling them, "No, you can't. We have to do an official search." And of course, the people at Goa realize this is an attempt to just take that muscle fiber back. We had no idea they had this many connections, and they do. And even once they do get in the air, flouting U.S. orders, they have to go through what's essentially Turkmenistan, I think it's supposed to be. And 2 Turkmenistan fighters show up and threaten that if they don't land immediately, they will shoot down their aircraft. Again, Symbol is pulling the strings. And they manage to, as a surprise measure, dangle their giant mech out of the cargo bay doors of this cargo plane, and they're able to shoot down a couple of the jet fighters just by luck and sheer skill. But that really starts to enter into the idea of there are much more powerful forces here. And once they get done with that, they finally get home to Japan. And then the show starts to take a significant detour, a significantly new track. We're introduced to Nishida and Goa. What is his name? Yeah. Goa Kazukiyo, the older brother, who is basically Giran Zabi. And Nishida and Goa Kazukiyo are both orchestrating some sort of plot in order to create a coup d'etat in Japan, because they both believe that Japan has gone by the wayside. It's abandoned its old duties, its old virtues. It's devoted itself entirely to the pursuit of pleasure and the pursuit of money. And they think something needs to be
Basically,
drastic.
materialism.
Yes, completely materialism. As a result, they decide. There's a little bit of that in the background. And then what also sets the plot into motion for Yushiro Yushiro, this whole time, the main character, has been having weird stuff going on where he'll just sort of act out of nowhere in the middle of the Iraqi mission. He goes on this whole escapade to talk and see to this Iraqi in Iraq, this woman that he saw in a vision back in episode 1, which really unnerves the other characters around him. But he's very stoic, and he doesn't give any official defense, and he's very Japanese in that fashion. He feels a lot of shame in having run off like that, but he can't very well explain, and he doesn't want to give excuses, so he gives no explanation. Very Japanese. This whole show is absurdly Japanese throughout.
Yes.
Yeah. Imagine my shock.
Like there was
a show made in Japan with Japanese characters centered around Japan, totally localized Japanese production facility is Japanese. Oh my shock.
Well, yeah, but there are certain anime like Gundam, say, where it takes place in the future, no one is Japanese, or even like a show like, let's say, Haruhi Suzumiya, which happens to take place in Japan. It's not like overbearing you with all these Shinto themes. These
look, I know that, but I know that, but it's a Japanese show that's Japanese, like it's shocker. But yes, the show is very, very Japanese.
Yeah, some have talked about how there really needs to be more shows that aren't just universal, that are very particular to a certain place and time period, and people really missing that. If you want that, you are very much going to enjoy this show, more than likely.
Yes. I'll agree. I would also agree with. I would also agree with the appeal that art needs to be less universal. But that's probably a different discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So
the main character, I should just back up a bit. Symbol is not going to let the fact that the Japanese Goa took this muscle fiber from them lying down. So they managed to break into the Goa area of Tokyo, and they take the muscle fiber back. And as part of this, one of the TA pilots they sent to do this is Miharu, the same one that Yushiro had a vision of. And she tells him Yushiro, because he's being held at the same facility, because the Goa see Yushiro as a test subject, because as Yushiro is about to find out, he is just a test subject. Miharu shows up after completing her mission, and she says to Yushiro, Goa, Yushiro, you died 8 years ago. And Yushiro goes, What? What? And so he starts asking the people in his own family. My official records apparently say that I died 8 years ago. What is this about? And they sort of direct him over to the local, I guess you could say, family keeper of arts, who taught him everything when it comes to this dancing. He reveals some of the family secrets in terms of that Yushiro is essentially almost like a halfway clone of the first Yushiro, who actually died in a previous dance attempt to bring about Gasaraki, the terror. And they also find the Kugai, this giant mech, this giant organic samurai-looking mech, which Yushiro gets taken in by. He gets pulled into it. If I were going to fault one aspect of this anime, it would undoubtedly be the fact that sometimes the different plot elements do sort of feel just stringed along. a character happens to go to this place and he happens to find the thing that moves the plot forward at times. This is more a relic of the early show rather than the later show. But sometimes it doesn't feel
Yeah.
like characters are pushing it forward, the story forward. Sometimes it feels like happenstance is pushing the story forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
Like Miharu does not have to be the one that broke into the Goa facility and found out all this data and stole back the muscle part. Could have been anyone else, but it happened to be Miharu, and it had to be Miharu, so she would actually give that information to Yushiro, and then the plot could move forward.
Right.
Yeah. I would agree that there are some structural issues in this show that do make it kind of sometimes it is kind of difficult to follow. I wasn't quite sure what was going on a lot of the time, but I think things do get explained later, obviously, and you explained the plot to me just now is actually quite helpful because that has actually helped me sort of organize my thoughts a bit better.
Piece
I
it
think,
together.
yeah. I think you pointed out some things I missed actually. So yeah, that was quite helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So, so Yushiro finds out about this, fights with, and once Yushiro gets inside this Kugai, this giant samurai organic mech, and it makes these horrible noises as it like creaks and awful, very, you might say Ava inspired, but a little bit more creepy than the Ava sometimes. One arm is
Yeah,
much
yeah,
larger
like
than the other.
this thing is like there's something off about this mech. Like when you see the mech itself, like you think to yourself, there's something fucking off about this damn mech.
Yeah, this thing is demonic, and true enough, in the story, it is more or less demonic. So Yushiro decides. Yushiro doesn't decide anything. He goes inside the mech. He gets in a trance. The mech starts destroying the enemy TAs, the two symbol TAs that sort of scoping around there, including Miharu's. Pulls Miharu out, and finally Yushiro sort of like just gets out of the thing, and Yushiro and Miharu talk a little. And then this is the other weird thing. It like immediately then cuts over to as they're sort of discovering one another, and Yushiro and Miharu are starting to understand that we know each other. We just met in episode 1, yet we know each other. And sure enough, you could say that they're sort of reincarnated. They are both Kai. And the show keeps dropping the term Kai, and you're just expected to piece it together as they slowly use the term more and more. The Kai are people who you might say are reincarnated. They're the main ones that can pilot the TAs as well as the Kugai so well, and as well as perform this great ceremony to bring about the terror. And and as part of this, they have sort of all these past memories, both of previous lives, and apparently of a whole bunch of other lives as well. And so Yushiro and Miharu, they were both, I guess you could say, lovers 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, this looks like around the Heian period type of era. So
yeah, what we're talking about is essentially like really, really early Japanese history, where it's like on the cusp of prehistorical, but not quite there yet. And then after introducing that, it's weird. This is like episode 12. They get into that. Then the next few episodes are all about the SDF, and we're just randomly introduced to the fact that the Japanese SDF has been testing more on tactical armors, and that they are pumping them full of drugs in order to make them better at piloting the tactical armor. And of course, this is a gigantic failure and is making the tactical armor pilots go absolutely nuts and berserk in the cockpits.
And start headhunting people, which is what samurai used to do back in the day as well. Like cut off their heads and shit. Like they're like carrying around like the heads of 7 mechs and shit.
Yeah, either they just fall over and drop dead from a heart attack, or they do just go around collecting the severed heads of the other giant mechs, which is really freaky. And so Yushiro is on the run at this point, but but unfortunately for him, he is caught. And he gets picked up, but this is after he's had a lot of talking with the people who keep the Kugai, a lot of insight on who he is. Is anyone else hearing that?
Yes,
Yes.
I am. What could that be?
That is coming
It's
from
Ford Agent.
Thought Agent.
Yeah, go on. Go on.
Is someone...
What's
Thought Agent,
what,
can you mute yourself until you realize... Okay.
Oh God, is it all right now?
No, it's
No,
getting worse.
is that the rain? Is that the rain?
I can't be that
I feel
able.
like nothing has changed on my end. I feel like this is just like a signal thing. This is like I don't know. Yeah, I mean myself though.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, there's this big excursion with the SDF robots. Yushiro decides that he is going to help these guys, and this is actually one of the little moments of growth for Yushiro. He realizes they're just going to artillery this one guy that managed to survive to death because he's about to go into populated areas, and Yushiro says, "I'm going to save him," and people around him go like, "Why? You're under no technical obligation. You could just like not risk your own life." And Yushiro says, "Well, because he's just like me." So so via a very a very reckless stunt, he first tries to save him in battle and fails, and they're about to destroy the enemy TA with cannon fire. But what Yushiro manages to do is he jumps right on top of the enemy TA right as the cannon fire is about to fall, and he uses sort of like the shock absorbers, the shockwave creators, I think you could say, of inside all the mechs, and he uses this to redirect the force of the cannon shots into digging out a giant hole in the ground. I don't really understand the physics of it, but the people in this show are very, very technical oriented, so I'm just going to assume that everything makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah,
Was that a
that's
little
what I
weird?
did too, to be honest. Yeah.
Yep, same here. I was like, fuck it.
Yeah, whatever. Sure. So you
Okay. I've cleaned my equipment. Is it better now?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
better. Okay, good.
So Yushiro manages to get through that, and he comes back to this ancient temple. And at this ancient temple, both he and Miharu are side by side. They touch this old piece of armor, this old, I think it was a Buddha statue. And all of a sudden they have a flashback. And this is one of the wildest things I've ever seen. 2 full episodes. Nothing but flashback.
Yes.
Nothing but a flashback.
God, I didn't like that, to be honest. I kind of fell asleep and I had to
I
rewatch it to be honest. But yeah,
I quite liked it, and I think Bio Gundam was talking with me a little bit about this. That whole part of it is done to set up this idea of man not learning from its mistakes. Uh, what you have essentially is what's supposed to be a direct parallel to what's going on at the time in present day. You have what's clearly supposed to be this ancestor to Goa Kazukiyo, aka Giran Zabi, and like him, he is like before. The Goa clan has given up using the Kugai, their sort of like ancestral weapons, as weapons, and they just use them as ceremony, parts of ceremonies essentially. And the emperor has demanded that the Goa hand them over. And while the go-ahead is reluctantly agreeing to
Hesitant.
this, yeah, you could say decent. The this other guy, I guess it would be the older son in this case, decides, no, I am not going to allow this. I am going to ensure that the cool guys stay ours, and we're going to go back to our old ways of being the puppeteers of Japan and whatnot, and being like all powerful. That he argues were essentially a military clan. As a result, he ends up killing his own father by the end, and starts leading this assault into Japan, into Tokyo. Well, it wouldn't be Tokyo at this point; it would be Kyoto. Yeah, it would be Kyoto.
Yes, Kyoto was the capital around this time, so
Yeah, leads this assault on Kyoto, on the emperor's on the emperor's palace, and basically, at first he's just demanding that they leave the Kugai alone, but soon it turns into a general all-out assault. But Yushiro and Miharu, who've already formed a connection earlier, I should backtrack a bit. As part of deciding who was going to rule the clan, there was this duel. I know this show is incredibly plot dense, and I can see why it will just drive some people up the wall. There was this duel between Yushiro and Miharu. They were both Kai, thus they were both pilots of the Kugai during this 1,000-year-old flashback. And Miharu is also the younger sister of this of her older brother that's leading this whole rebellion. And they were supposed to have this ritualistic duel where they fight to the death inside the Kugai to decide whose claim is more legitimate. And Yushiro just simply, he won the battle, but something struck him, and it's not, I guess you could say it's just compassion. Maybe someone who's watched the show another time could like explain whether it was just compassion or maybe it was an even further back life that struck him. But he doesn't want to take Miharu's life in this whole
like to him, it's like no, oh my, it's like shit, not this shit again.
I don't.
yeah, it's quite.
I mean, I don't
quite
think they really explain. I think he himself says that he doesn't know why he didn't try to kill her. But yeah,
Yeah, he doesn't know why, but he can tell that there's some sort of greater significance to all this. And as a result, he refuses to kill Miharu, which greatly irritates the older brother who like demands that Yushiro go and kill Miharu, and he shoots Yushiro a couple times in the legs, telling him get back in the mech and kill that woman. And then the father gets in the way and tries to stop this, and then the older son just shoots his father in the back with an arrow. And thus he is taken over and become the clan and leader of Goa. And he decides then that the full carrying out of this ceremony is no longer necessary. Although he does chastise Yushiro quite a bit. And after that, they attempt to take over. But in the middle of all this, in the middle of this great battle against the Emperor and his forces, Miharu sort of becomes overtaken with grief at the Giant White, at the fact that they seem to be bringing about the terror. And the terror seems to have happened a number of times. They actually mention that this random battle between the Koreans and the Chinese in the year 600, where the Koreans won overwhelmingly, was actually a manifestation of the terror, aka Gasaraki, as well. And Miharu gets overtaken by this despair of she doesn't want to bring this about. And so she sort of hesitates at the last. Well, actually, it was Yushiro as well who started to hesitate and decide he doesn't want to bring about the terror. And in between all this, Yushiro and Miharu formed a connection, and like again, even though they'd only known each other for a day, they feel a great closeness to one another. I guess you could say it's very new type-ish, although part of it also is that Miharu feels like her whole life has been being a Kai, and that she's failed in being that. Therefore, the only thing she has to go back on is this man that saved her, and she feels like an odd bit of attachment and love towards him as a result. So Yushiro stops.
I mean, I can't remember. Did she ever want to be a Kai?
She mentions that her whole life has been a Kai, and that her whole life has been really looking up to her older brother's shoulders. And that's been her whole thing in life. And Yushiro saving her has almost given her a new thing, a new way to look at life, and a new way to go through life.
By the way, I think that even then, I mean, so the flashback happens 1,000 years ago or something, or maybe not that.
Yes, 1,000 years ago. Yeah. It mentions exactly 1,000.
But they happen to have the same names, and the older brother happens to look like
Kazukiyo.
Yes, so the older brother.
Yes.
Look, the older brother reincarnated to fuck shit up, obviously.
Yes. He reincarnated to always be a fuck up, no matter in what time period. But yeah, this is very heavy in Buddhist themes, very heavy in the idea of reincarnation, and also the idea of Kazukiyo in particular is a proponent of creation coming through destruction, whereas by the end, Yushiro and Miharu are proponents for no, creation only comes through mutual trust. Yeah. Again, I wish we had someone who was like a practicing Buddhist or really knowledgeable about Buddhist stuff on here, because I'm sure he could tell us something about some of the depths of what they talk about in this show.
Right. There's also this theme about. So I think Yushiro and Miharu. I can't remember who tells who. I think in the flashback it's Miharu telling Yushiro that we shouldn't accept fate
Mm-hmm.
Um,
No. It was fate is not written in stone; it is
yeah, something
created.
like that. Yes, but I kind of found that a little bit funny because you basically have the same thing, which happened in the flashback getting repeated.
Well, yes, but in each case, the terror, the Gasaraki, could have happened, but it was the choice of Yushiro, in this case, to prevent it.
What the hell is
And
the Terra anyway?
that is the very end of the. You remember episode 25, the very, very end?
Yes.
Vaguely.
Okay, yeah, that is the terror. And that's actually one of the things that actually, I guess you could say, also bugs me the most about the show. These little nitpicks here and there. The terror, the terror is set up as being this apocalyptic thing that is absolutely horrible and will just destroy things. Yet it's never clear that it will actually do that, and not even the ending seems to really support that. I mean, it does result in a giant explosion of death that is going to kill a lot of people, as it apparently did in this great battle in the year 600 between the Koreans and the Chinese. But that doesn't really speak to it being this apocalyptic, necessarily evil weapon, but that is very much how it is treated.
Yeah.
Yushiro chooses not to go through with the terror. The older brother is absolutely miffed at this, and he goes, "Yushiro, what the hell are you doing?"
I
And
mean,
he starts.
why does he even want? Why does he even want the Terra to happen?
Well, this is more fleshed out with Kazukiyo. Um, and I guess we can sort of infer into this from Kazukiyo's motivations that the terror is this thing where it does seem to be a gateway potentially in order to power, to all this knowledge and almost sort of like transcending time.
Well,
And
I mean, it seemed to me. So, if you're talking about the flashback, it seemed to me that the older brother just wanted the Terra to happen so that he could basically defeat. I mean, he could have still defeated the Emperor with the two mechs. So, yeah,
yeah,
I still don't get why. In
it does sort of seem like he is just miffed at the fact that Yushiro stopped doing what he was doing. It's one could interpret it almost as just he is a petty tyrant to a certain degree. He one thing I'll say about the show is it's even the evil characters like him are not nutso, and they actually show a great deal of restraint at times. But in this case, he's just so angry that someone is disobeying his command, and one could say that that's part of why he starts firing on Yushiro again. And Miharu, in like shock and anger, stabs him and kills him. But then, as a result, she realizes, "Oh shit! I've stabbed my older brother," and she just goes absolutely nutso. And so that whole rebellion fails, and the flashback ends. But as a result, we flash forward to the modern day, and Miharu, from the shock of all that, has basically gone catatonic. Like her eyes gray over, and she just stops interacting with the world. She's completely shut herself off. Next bunch of episodes are Yushiro hiding amongst the Asian veins. In this timeline, it takes place in 2014. There has also been a migrant crisis, except the migrant crisis has mostly flown into Japan, and it's mostly been other East Asians. And it's created a huge problem with all these essentially ghetto areas where different gangs with heavy weaponry and rocket launchers and whatnot control and dominate the streets. So Yushiro hides out there for a little bit because he's trying to hide from his own Goa family, who are using him just as like this puppet, as this subject. And also he wants to protect Miharu, who's also on the run from Symbol. And they manage to hide out for a while, and here this plot transfers back to the people that are planning this plot, and also to the squad mates that Yushiro practiced with back in Iraq, in Belgistan. And these squad mates, and who earlier were actually propositioned to save the SDF pilots that went berserk and failed, and then Yushiro had to be brought in. These characters are now asked, well, do you want to become part of this coup plot? And their leader, the Colonel Hayakawa, is initially against it. But after some very in-depth talks with Nishida, and do we want to talk a little bit about Nishida himself?
Yes, because I feel that after the flashback, it basically it becomes about Nishida for the most part.
Almost entirely. Nishida is. I think they mentioned that he was an old lieutenant colonel in the Japanese Self-Defense Force. He is not happy with modern materialistic Japan. He thinks Japan has lost what it used to be, and he's also not particularly happy about American hegemony either. By the way, this show literally drops the term hegemony into the middle of the show, in case you're wondering how political this show is. But anyways, Nishida, so him and a Colonel Hirakawa are organizing this plot alongside Kazukiyo Goa to essentially take over the Japanese government for a time. And he asks Colonel Hayakawa of the TA division for his support. Initially, Hayakawa says no, but they have a 2-day long, all-day discussion on the merits of like justice and what is needed for virtue in the society, and how they can actually and how does the law play into important times in history. Nishida, of course, makes the point that in such important times the law falls silent, and also that the law is not always apt to provide justice in such times. Nishida manages to convince the Colonel Hayakawa, and the plot goes from there, where the actual coup attempt starts. And this is the other weird thing. The coup attempt is based off of the fact that they know that the US had a really, really shitty grain harvest, that they were going to have a shitty grain harvest for the year, because temperatures are going up, probably influenced by talk of global warming at the time. Oh, did someone leave?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I guess Bio Gundam had to go.
Yes, it's late for him. Yes.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Hopefully my audio still works.
Oh gosh, it's back. But anyways,
what? I thought I fixed it. Oh well. How bad is it?
Just mute yourself whenever you're.
I think it's working now.
Mute yourself whenever you're not talking.
Yeah, okay. All right. So, oh God, what was I going to say? Yeah. For me, the ending of this series, the last few episodes with the old man.
Yes.
What was his name?
Ishida.
Ishida. Those were the most interesting episodes for me. I think mainly just because what he's getting at and what he desires does somewhat relate to my thinking at this moment. But yeah, and the coup attempt, which is based off of Grey.
Yeah, it's all sort of somewhat complicated. They know that there's going to be a grain shortage. They know that the U.S.'s harvest is going to be particularly bad. So the U.S. Decides that they are going to completely halt all grain exports to the rest of the world, which is huge because that makes it so that Japan and a lot of other countries suddenly can't feed themselves. This is going to be an absolute shit show. And as a result, Nishida knows that there's going to be riots, so he sends in the TAs to
By
put
the
down
way,
these.
the grain shortage itself, it's not something which was part of anyone's plan, right? It just happened.
No. It very much was part of Nishida's plan. They make this quite clear in the show that Nishida knew, and he was projecting that the U.S. was going to have a grain shortage, and that the U.S. was going to put
I
through
see.
this policy.
I see.
He
I mean,
had no inside knowledge of it, and they make it quite clear.
I
He
mean,
was just able to predict it based off of certain factors.
yes. I mean, I guess. I mean, before that point, like I didn't get any feeling that, or there was no foreshadowing that there was a grain shortage,
No.
and
The,
yeah,
this is very much the type of show where every 3 or 4 episodes there is a new arc, and although it's one continuous storyline, the new arc is devoted to just that part in the story, and that does, you're right, leave it where certain parts of the story aren't super set up well. They're just sort of like introduced when they become relevant.
yes.
I mean, it's understandable.
I mean,
Because this is a very plot dense show.
yes. I mean, what I meant was that Nishida or Symbol they didn't actually cause the grain shortage.
No,
No.
and I think that's actually to the show's credit because it's not setting up the idea of like, although they're setting up Symbol as being obviously this evil Illuminati, they're not setting them up as being all evil or all powerful.
Yes, I guess what I thought was that Nishida's plan kind of hinged on the grain shortage, which we don't really know how and why he was able to predict. We just know that he was able to predict it, and with a lot of other things as well, which Nishida was able to predict was going to happen. Like the story makes it seem like he's a genius for being able to predict that this and that will happen, but we don't really see how he's able to predict it.
Well, it doesn't go into
details.
Yeah.
He
doesn't
just
go
able
into
to, yeah.
details. I think it's quite easy to understand how one could predict a grain shortage.
But I guess why is it just him? I mean, yeah.
I'm sure there are other people who would, but again, this goes to like sort of worldview and if you pay attention to such things. But like, let's say for example, all this inflation stuff that is starting to crop up now. There have been people ringing the bell about out of control U.S. federal spending, 10 trillion or so just being handed over to banks by the Federal Reserve, et cetera, et cetera. People have been talking about how this will lead to inflation for quite some time, but it didn't happen immediately,
yes, I know.
so no one believed it. And it's probably just the same with this grain shortage.
I mean, yeah, but I guess how did he get the timing exactly? About like, I mean, there's a lot of people that say that there's going to be inflation, but the timing, like, okay, like if you ask them, like, is it going to happen next month, or like give us a date,
In something like this, I think he could be just going based off of last year's grain shortage.
Yeah, but we don't know we don't know that. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, we don't know that. We're speculating, but again, I don't find that hard to believe.
Yes,
Personally.
it's not
That's
hard to
me.
believe, but they don't really sell it that well either, in my opinion. It's not by which I mean it's they're not showing us like why he's a genius or something. And another thing which I felt was that um, symbol. I kind of felt it wasn't explored properly. What the fuck symbol is? What symbol wants? I mean,
symbol.
I mean, yes, and another thing. Symbol was not really the opposite, like the antagonists.
No.
Yeah. So
they were secondary antagonists.
yes, at best. Yes.
That
Yeah. I thought Symbol just sort of disappeared, like halfway through or something, and then just sort of turned into the sort of counter, the counter governmental force. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It wasn't. Yeah, I don't really think that was sort of presented that all that well. I was
Well-
like, and I was kind of interested a lot in Symbol in that sort of third episode, because there obviously was a lot of plotting going on, and there was these people, sort of
Cold.
in these meetings and things. I thought it could have been very interesting if it stuck around for a bit longer, and maybe they just had more time. Yeah. I guess it the white-haired guy. I forgot his name, of course. As usual.
apparently Fiesler.
Oh yeah, the
Yeah.
Fiesler,
Yeah.
I'm not sure they even speak his name once in the show. Maybe he says it like very quickly, but I don't. But he is the head of Symbol in reality.
Yeah. And he's the one who distorts his voice, and he's nominally the head of Symbol, and I think the least subtle episode is episode 22, where Issue is that the guy's name? Oh God.
Nishida, I'm having little trouble hearing you.
Yeah, the old guy.
Yeah,
Yes,
Nishida. Yes.
Yes, where he and Nishida have a sort of a long conversation, and they sort of speak about like their manifestos and what they think is best. I thought it was sort of helpful, really, to sort of understanding their emotions. But I think it could be a bit more subtle rather than them two sort of standing in front of each other, while they have this this private debate with one another. Yeah. The rest of the series is quite sort of restrained, though, really.
Yes, and I would also like to add that what I was trying to say was, when I said that Symbol wasn't the antagonist, I meant it in the sense that Symbol wasn't a proper antagonist to Nishida. They had their own, basically, that guy, the Pifno or whatever. He had his own totally separate goal that I'm not sure Nishida even had any idea about bringing on the Terror.
And Fiesler wasn't even interested in bringing down Nishida. He helps the United States a little bit in terms of telling him what Nishida's trying to do, but you can tell it's only because he feels a little obligated, because there's already a relationship with them, and he talks directly with the U.S. president and sort of tells the U.S. president what to do, almost. It's kind of fitting for today's times.
Yes. So Toragent said that that discussion that Nishida had was a bit too explicit, and maybe it could have been done in a more subtle way. But
Uh,
at the same time, I also felt that Nishida's goal and plan wasn't clear, especially with the ending. Like when at the end he was like, "Oh well, apparently it turns out he wants to dismantle the Japanese self-defense forces and."
yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. That was it was kind of weird, and it does sort of speak to the times this was made in '98. But
Go on.
yeah, Nishida knows that the United States is going to create this grain crisis. So after essentially assuming direct power of Japan via emergency authorization because of the riots, he decides that that he's going to take all of Japan's associated debts and whatnot, which they calculate to be something like 20 trillion US dollars, which is probably overstating it a little, but this was the future then. And he says that, hey, if the US doesn't back down, what we're going to do is we're going to dump all our debt on the market. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a huge financial crisis across the world, and it's going to cause the value of the dollar to go crazy, and it's going to cause hyperinflation basically throughout the world economy, but the US as well. And as a result, and basically Nishida's bet is, as he tells the white-haired guy, is that there will be 3 slim years of poverty, but Japan will be able to survive those slim years. How long will America last? 1 year, if that? So sort of like a very jaundiced view of like America is this not even a nation state, just a country or a marketplace that is sort of tied together and held together by good times. It's very much tacitly endorsing that view of America.
Yes. Go on.
And so essentially he makes this dare. The United States attempts to send TAs and whatnot in order to destroy the Japanese nerve center and actually kill Nishida and the rest of them in order to prevent this sell-off. Under, of course, completely legal auspices of the CIA, of course. They name, but ultimately the Japanese TA division, with Yushiro participating, is able to defeat them. And so at the last moment after those guys are defeated, the United States president calls up Nishida and he says, "Okay, I cave. We're going to not have this grain, ban all grain exports. We will still export some of our grain, and we'll just sort of tighten our belts and make sure that there's enough to go around for the world." And Nishida honors him for this. He says that by doing this, it has been a victory for both our countries, that you've chosen to voluntarily renounce hegemony, and that this is essentially good for the whole world. And Nishida then hangs up and says, I have to do something in order to make amends and make closure. And he writes a death haiku, and he commits seppuku, believing that his actions were so drastic, because he did essentially take over the government for a certain time in a military coup, that the only method to show his own seriousness and that this wasn't just some random escapade is by action and by committing seppuku in the traditional manner. This is a guy, I haven't mentioned this up until then, but if you take a look at him, he has no eyes, and he has a scars across his eyes, and he cut out his own eyes because he was so disgusted at what he saw of modern Japan. He is someone who is samurai to the core, and he is someone who believes absolutely in the principles of the samurai of Bushido, but very much of showing one's own seriousness through action and ultimately through self-immolation.
Yeah. I did. He was definitely one of my favorite characters. He's also quite a tragic character. Yes, and he did cut out of his. He did destroy his eyesight. With his own blade.
Yes.
And this does mean he can't see. The degeneration of Japanese society. But this also means if he actually wins, he won't be able to see the good times either. And he recognizes this that
That's true.
Yes, what he wants to do may work, but there's a very high chance he's going to have to sacrifice himself in order for this in order to actually do this, but also that he probably will actually fail,
Yeah.
in a classic, reactionary style.
Yes.
And
it's actually,
I definitely appreciate that character.
Yes, he's very he is not someone who is arrogant or anything like that. And one of the symbolic things that they have him do, and this is one of the things you could actually criticize Nishida for as a character, of not going all the way. Although this is very much how the show is trying to contrast him compared to Kazukiyo, who is just complete ambition. Nishida, his original plan for military rule for 3 years was based on the idea of the grain shortage and then dumping all the debt and thus worldwide depression, and that would allow 3 years of military rule to push Japan into a society that was less obsessed with wealth and more obsessed with virtue. By having the US president back down and Nishida himself then backing down, he has given up that dream in exchange for America choosing to give up its hegemony, or at least for a time. And that's quite the back down, but the show is sort of like tacitly approving of this in terms of the idea of this is a guy that, if given a lesser way out, isn't going to make people needlessly suffer, even if he's not getting quite the vision he wanted. But I do feel kind of mixed on that, because while yes, America has been taken down a peg, whether Japan actually reseats itself is entirely based off of whether people will be inspired by Nishida's example. Although I guess you could say that was always sort of the plan, that the people had to be inspired by Nishida's example by the end. So I guess you could say in that manner the plan didn't change much. There's also a mention at the end that Nishida was also hoping that for a gradual military build down in all nations across the world. I see that as very much a relic of sort of the post-war era, the talk between Reagan and Gorbachev, where they talked about mutual denuclearization. In this case, it would be mutual demilitarization, period. It does kind of come across out of the blue and kind of odd for someone who is. It's not necessarily contradictory for someone who espouses the samurai ethos like Nishida to be for that, because his focus very much is on virtue and on people having values above materials possessions. But at the same time, the way of the warrior
Yeah.
was about dedicating yourself to being a warrior. So it's oddly contradictory that he then go a pacifistic route and then go, well, okay, we're not going to dedicate ourselves to be warriors, and we're not going to dedicate ourselves to consumerism. What are we going to dedicate ourselves to? I guess you could say God, but there isn't much
Yeah.
explicit mention of God in
I think
this.
I think it's peace, whatever
No,
that's
not.
supposed to mean.
Yeah, and I think his motivations made perfect sense, right? Because he states sort of earlier on that Japan has the capacity to feed 40% of its population.
Yes.
Right, and so if Japan's economy collapses, it would no longer be able to buy food from elsewhere.
Yes.
This so there's this obvious threat of mass starvation, right?
Yes.
Which would be incredibly cruel if this was imposed all at once.
Yes.
If the entire society just collapses.
Yeah.
This also
If you've played Deus Ex, his is Nishida is basically like the third Deus Ex ending, where everyone almost like the whole world, internet, and economy collapses, and people go back to living tribally. I mean, Nishida wasn't going to take it back that far, but very much the same idea of intentionally collapsing the financial system. But ultimately, Nishida decides not to go through with that because he feels that he's gotten enough already, and that final step is not necessary.
yeah. Additionally, it's fairly obvious that he obviously has a great love um, for the Japanese people still, which is why he blinded himself because he couldn't stand looking at these people. Even though he hates their sort of nature and what they became.
Yes,
The
that is a
reason for his hate is because of his love for these people,
yes, that is a
and so he obviously isn't going to be the guy who's going to knowingly sort of starve people, starve out so many of his own people. If
Yeah, but
like
isn't that
unless
what he said he was
but
going? Wasn't that the plan? I mean,
positive offer comes along.
that was the original plan, if necessary, but again, emphasis on if necessary, and that was always sort of like the fundamental disagreement between Nishida and Kazukiyo. Kazukiyo was like very skeptical of like, were the Japanese ever this virtuous people, or is this basically just a myth? And Nishida says like, no, they were, and he also makes this point that this line, no matter what anyone else may say, nothing can change the fact that I am Japanese. He he feels this tremendous attachment both to Japan as a nation and to the Japanese people, and he feels. Whereas Kazukiyo looks at the Japanese people as being essentially a bunch of sickly people, almost like foreigners. Uh, Nishida very much views the Japanese people like the prodigal son. He views them like a son or a brother who's gone off, spent his fortunes terribly, lost all his money, gotten on drugs, whatever. And Nishida views it as his duty to almost stake them out of it, but in
Um,
as loving a way as possible, because
yeah,
ultimately they're his
yeah,
family.
um, yeah, exactly. I'm sorry for birding you. I'm sorry for birding the two of you with my awful audio today. I'll try to get it fixed for a next time. It was very interesting this conversation, but I do have to go now, unfortunately.
Right.
Just my closing thoughts. But obviously you guys can continue. I would rate this a 7 out of 10. I think it definitely does. It definitely does go sort of above in a lot of respects, and I really enjoyed the camaraderie
Mhm.
in that sort of army group you see, and the antagonists' motivations. Yeah, it's all really interesting stuff, and yeah, this was a good conversation to be to listen to for the
Yeah.
most part. But anyway, I'll talk to you guys later, hopefully.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I'd give the show an 8, personally. I was quite impressed by it. But anyways, Nishida commits seppuku, and then there's sort of the last minute final act where Kazukiyo, again, he's basically Giren Zabi. He's already taken control of his own family legally from his father in their own method. And he arranges to create this artificial Kugai and start the terror. And of course, he brings in the main character's little sister, who's like lovingly devoted to the main character Yushiro, to the point that it does actually somewhat stray into romantic love, even though Yushiro would not accept it in that capacity.
And I think that they're not really siblings, so there's that classic anime excuse.
Yeah, that's fair, but it very much the story very much views it as sort of like, on the one hand, not necessarily something to accredit, but they also do see it as a manifestation of her own filial virtue and her own quite healthy regard for her own brother.
Yeah, I mean, like you do kind of see it in other anime as well, like where the younger sister always calls the older brother Onisama,
Yes.
respectfully.
Yes.
I think the probably the biggest example that comes to mind is Mahoka or whatever.
Oh yeah. Well, to contrast with that, Mahoka is a fetish show, and that show is very much playing up. Oh, isn't the idea of brother sister incest so hot? And you see that in a fair bit of anime. This show is explicitly not doing that. This is just something that character is, but it is not played up as being something to aspire to. In fact, even at one point, she says like, Ophelia died at 13 years old for love. Why can't I? And the audience is supposed to go like, oh jeez, she's got a bit of a screw loose. She really needs to calm down.
I don't know. I mean, it could also be like, oh, how romantic she is. Whatever. It doesn't really matter because we don't really spend that much time with that character
No,
anyway.
no. But she shows up by the end. It's revealed that she is a Kai as well. She gets thrown into the Kugai, and it's their father attempts to interfere with this, and Kazukiyo, of course, shoots their father in order to prevent this, repeating the mistakes of his own 1,000-year-old ancestor, and of course, proving himself to be absolute scum who will do anything for ambition. And so the terror goes off, and Yushiro, Miharu, and Kazukiyo, along with Misuzu, the little sister, are all brought into the Kugai and this really wild gold area with tons of bodies. And there's this it's really interesting how they set it up. It's like a mixture of the characters' half faces with these live action pics of water flowing, very esoteric, obviously influenced by Ava in terms of the way they presented this. And what they basically explain is that the Kugai and all this and the Terror are ancient aliens. And they themselves were also going through a civilizational decline. And they sort of decided to start going to preserve themselves through this system of the Kai and keeping memories going inside people. And they do sort of almost have a door. I'm not doing enough justice to it because I only just rewatched it last night, and I'm sure I can probably give a better description of it if I rewatched it just again. But
Yeah, I certainly did not expect an Eva-like ending suddenly.
yeah, and and ultimately, Miharu and they basically, the main characters Yushiro and Miharu condemn them for saying like, how many lives have you manipulated towards this goal ultimately? How many people have suffered as a result of this, etc., etc. And they decide that they're going to break away from this entirely, that essentially by doing so, they're going to undo the process of the Kai, they're going to undo the process of Gasaraki even possibly being called again. And they managed to bring the little sister out. And Kazukiyo, who you should note is constantly, he's always very stoic. He never loses his cool. All of a sudden, he starts going nuts and going, wait, no, this can't be happening. Grant me passage, Gasaraki. And his whole thing in what he was trying to accomplish with this was somehow sort of a gateway to infinite knowledge and power as well. And he wanted to use this in order to accomplish that.
Honestly, I would have wished if he had remained stoic, a bit like Gendo in the end of Eva. Like, I mean, he's not. I mean, he's like, oh yeah, I have failed, but he's not desperate, I guess.
No, because that would work if the idea was that Kazukiyo was simply a flawed hero, that he was simply someone that went slightly too far. But that was not what they were trying to go with Kazukiyo. Kazukiyo was supposed to be, as much as he puts off this very polite and conniving tone, he is someone who is absolutely motivated by this, devoted to this. There is nothing in the world more important to him than this. He's not going to just let it slip away from his fingers.
I think that it was at the end, only at the end, that we were told that he wanted to be a Kai.
Yes.
I don't think we had any idea about that earlier.
Yeah, we're only told at the very end. This show, there's a lot of things like that seem to speak to the fact that some of this show's story may have been slightly being made up as it went along. Like, they probably have the outline, but they were probably filling in details as they went along. That's just my guess, that's my speculation. But there are so many things like that which are dropped in, which make sense, but are not set up. It does speak to some parts of the story being made up as they went along. And that's possibly why this story doesn't resonate as much with people. It is not as coherently put together as you might expect from a masterpiece, let's say.
Yes, I don't think that this anime really had any influence on anime that came later. Oh,
The most influence I could speak to is the fact that I'm fairly certain that the giant mechs and the little wires that they use were probably the inspiration for the Slash Hawkins and Code Geass, especially since you have the same director. He was the assistant director, Goro Taniguchi, in this, and he'd go on to be the head guy in Code Geass.
yes, I mean, I guess you do see the political stuff and some Japanese nationalism in Code Geass as well, I guess. Not that
Somewhat, but
much.
it's
A little bit.
not that much. It's
Yeah.
very in its own way.
Yes.
Also, they reveal at the end that the guy who was leading Symbol, he was also a Kai, and he's apparently been cursed to wander the Earth for 2,000 years, and he shows up in like this Roman toga, and he's like allowed to die,
Oh, I
which is
sort of like the Wandering Jew, yeah. But
yeah, it's sort of interesting because there's no other like references to Christianity whatsoever. Like just that.
yes,
So
I wonder
maybe
if
the
the
ancient
Japanese.
aliens, maybe the ancient aliens are somewhat involved with Jesus, or maybe Jesus is divine and is just not making a comment. It's not entirely clear there.
Yes, I don't. I'm not aware of any Japanese myths about. But I guess it could be explained given that this has an Eva-like ending. So, and
Mhm.
Eva drew a lot from Christianity. So, like, let's do the same
Mhm.
when it comes to this guy. I was under the impression that maybe all Kai were immortal, but unless they are killed. So maybe that was why.
I
So
don't think so.
I
Um,
see.
I mean, I mean, it could be. For all we know, it's possible. Because well, they show Yushiro dying in the flashback, but not maybe Yushiro dying in the flashback, but not necessarily Miharu.
I see.
But even then, this guy being forced to walk 2,000 years, and he definitely wanted to die. So I think it's more likely that he was like completely immortal, and that this was just a him thing. That this wasn't the other
I
guys.
see. I guess I assumed that it was the other Kais too because they don't explain why him specifically, but why he specifically did not die. So I thought maybe okay, he's a Kai, he's immortal. So maybe the other Kais. By immortal, I mean he would die if he was killed, but he
Yes.
wouldn't die of old age or something.
Hmm.
Something like that. I kind of felt like this was more about the mechs, the story. With the other stuff, maybe the
No,
politics. I mean,
I very much disagree on that. There is a lot of emphasis on trying to keep the mechas realistic, and you see a lot more of that in the early show. But the
I,
later show is a lot more influenced on this idea of, well, it is somewhat caught up in Nishida's views, but it also in sort of rejecting what Kazukiyo was going for.
what I mean, what was Kazukiyo going for? I mean, he wasn't going for something directly opposed to Nishida, right? It's not like he disagreed with Nishida
Yes.
that Japan was a shithole and
Yes.
needed to be cleaned up. I guess maybe he wanted to be a bit more authoritarian about it, and Nishida did not. I mean,
Well, sort of the idea is Kazukiyo, one, he was willing to go through with whatever was necessary in order to set about his reformation, and two, he was completely attached to the idea of himself at the head of it. And there's actually a point where they're in the dreamscape in the Gasaraki where they're talking about how Kazukiyo is lusting over this power and all of it. And Yushiro is saying, no, even if we accomplished all this absolute power, what would it do for us? What good would it be? Like, would it change our emotions? Would it really improve our lives in a meaningful way? In a way, Yushiro is someone. No, Kazukiyo, excuse me. Kazukiyo is someone who's been going after power his whole life. That's his whole reason for being. And while he has slightly more ideals than, say, Hillary Clinton, still he is ultimately someone that's out for power. And Yushiro is someone who, at the end, utterly rejects that. All he wants is a life with people that he can trust. And sort of the final ending is where Yushiro and Miharu explicitly tell him in that whole dreamscape that trust is mutual trust and love and all that is more important in terms of creation and also just in terms of having a happy life
I just didn't
than the pursuit of power.
I just didn't see any connection between Nishida's goal and Yushiro, because they didn't really care about Yushiro and the others. They didn't really care about the politics or anything like that. They were just about each other, I guess. Miharu and so
Yeah, Yushiro had and Miharu had much smaller aims, just in terms of like not being puppets anymore. There's sort of a parallel to them in terms of they were both willing to back down from power, because like Yushiro could have like went in and tried to grab this power the same once they were in the dreamscape, same as Kazukiyo, and he chooses not to. He walks away from it. He, like Nishida, he doesn't think that there's utility in that. I guess you could say there's almost like a sliding scale of how much power is needed. Yushiro is I don't want power.
I think
Nishida is I want power, but for a time and just to achieve my objectives, and then I relinquish it.
Yes.
And Kazukiyo is I want power for all time.
Yeah. Yes, go on.
And you do see that in earlier scenes where Kazukiyo has talks with Yushiro, and Kazukiyo in those scenes berates Yushiro, basically saying he says it in a much more sophisticated way, as is fitting of Kazukiyo, but he basically berates Yushiro for not being about power, for not being willing to do everything that is necessary in order to achieve your aims. Whereas Yushiro does feel that there are limits.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of felt with the whole like we are not going to be puppets, and it's not just that they're not going to be puppets, but they're not going to be puppets for the ideals of others. Because for instance, if you look at the flashback, basically they were puppets to tradition, essentially.
Yes,
and so there's kind of an individualistic strain when it comes to
certainly
Yushiro and Miharu rejecting being tools of basically the ideals of others.
Yes.
Yeah, which...
And also part of the idea is very much rejecting those who use others as tools to their aims. And that's actually one of the big dividing lines they make between Kazukiyo and Nishida. Nishida, whenever he involves someone, like say in his plot, he's upfront with them, and he tries to explicitly convince them.
But not really. I mean, he was. I think he was given that he knew so much about what was going on. He was probably in on basically the prime minister being deceived and made to make the riots worse. So it's not like
Oh, sure.
Nishida was above using people as his
No,
tools
no, no,
without
no.
their permission.
But what I'm talking about is people who, like, let's say were in his inner circle that were like formerly his allies. He was going to bring them in voluntarily and through much discussion, whereas Kazukiyo was the type of person, like, his own allies he used as disposable.
Yes, but I guess what was the reason that Nishida did that? Wasn't that just because he needed their trust for his goal, whereas he didn't need the trust of, say, the prime minister or whatever for his goal? So
you could say that, but you also see a discrepancy in terms of how they were going to react if Colonel Hayakawa had rejected their offer. Kazukiyo was just going to go ahead with things and push through regardless, and he was just going to arrange to have Colonel Hayakawa assassinated if he didn't agree.
Yes.
Meanwhile, Nishida says up front, like, if I wasn't able to convince you, I was going to do away with this whole thing and commit seppuku.
Yes. Yeah. In that case, yes, he was. But couldn't that be because he thought that he wouldn't be able to achieve his goal without their help, without their trust?
You could interpret it that way, but again, I think he still would have had a chance even without them, and he could have gone through the same way Kazukiyo would have in terms of like assassinating him, finding someone else.
I think it was implied very much that they really needed the help of the.
Yes, it was very much implied that they needed the help of the TA Corps because they knew once they put this into motion that the U.S. was going to respond, that they were going to throw TAs in order to get rid of the Japanese, get rid of whoever was heading this coup, and that basically the TAs were probably going to be the only weapon that could stand up to other TAs.
Because if I'm not mistaken, he said that if the colonel had rejected his offer, he was going to kill himself because he didn't think that he would. By him, I mean Nishida didn't think that he would be able to carry out the plan without the colonel. Otherwise, why would he kill himself for not being able to convince the colonel? And another thing. Because it's like there are two endings in episode 24 and then 25. In episode 24, you get the ending to the Nishida story, and then in episode 25 you get the overall ending to what began in episode 1 with the dance with Yushiro.
Yes, dance and Yushiro's story.
And I kind of feel like it is true that Nishida was rejecting Kazuhiko or whatever. But at the same time, I feel like Yushiro and Miharu were rejecting. They were certainly rejecting Kazuhiko, but I think they were also kind of rejecting Nishida as well, in a sense.
Yes, you could make that argument. I just sort of felt that they were indifferent towards it. And I say you could actually say that that's a fault of the story, is they don't have time and don't give Miharu and Yushiro time to have a strong feeling one way or another on it. Ultimately, Yushiro backs it because because his own TA Corps is backing it, and he, by this point, feels a great sense of camaraderie with them, and he wants to protect his friends. But other than that, he has no strong feelings one way or another on this, although I'm sure he's not too happy about the idea of the Americans just assassinating Japanese officials.
Yes, yes, I'm pretty sure about that. But I mean, the whole overall goal of basically people like Nishida and Kazuhiko
Hmm.
manipulating everyone from the background uh,
Hmm.
so that they can put in place their own ideals. It seems it's
Yes.
because with the whole arc where so basically while Nishida was doing his thing, his plan, now Yushiro and Miharu were in the Asian vein thing, and they kind of seemed to accept that. Oh well, like even in these places where like it's full of immigrants or whatever,
Hmm.
life still goes on. Like there are
Yes.
good people and bad people, and
Yes.
look at all these good people helping Yushiro and
That's no amount.
Mahiru for basically no reason other than because they also don't want to be tools.
Well, yeah, he also saved one of them, which happens off screen, which is very, very jarring.
Yeah, still, but I mean, there's literally no opposition to keeping Yushiro and Miharu, even though like uh, there are people coming to kill them, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah,
Well,
that's it.
I don't know if you noticed it, but the guy that was helping them out most of all, it was I think Ken was his name. It
One,
was probably something else.
one,
Mr. One.
Chinese,
Uh,
probably. Yes.
yeah, he was in Symbol and had contact with Symbol. So part of the reason he was helping Yushiro out was because Symbol was playing the long game with him as informant to try and get Miharu back.
Yes,
And
but
all and
yeah,
also he worked for Symbol in the past, and he could relate to Yushiro's resentment at just being used as a tool his whole life.
yes, yes, yeah, but he's acting against Symbol for the sake of Yushiro,
Mhm.
and Mairo
By
essentially.
the end.
But, no, not even by the end because
No, no,
he
very.
agrees he agrees. He basically starts. He pretends to agree with Symbol to buy time in order to get Mahiru um, and and Yushiro out.
Mhm.
So from the start. He doesn't want to get back into Symbol or to betray them from the very start. Um,
Well,
yes,
I don't think you could say that he's necessarily decided on anything from the start. I think my interpretation from what they show with the characters is that he gradually came to choose that decision, and that it was just a gradual choice he fell into.
let's say. I mean, let's just agree to disagree because that's not how I remember it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not
it's not
super
important.
important point.
So yes. Anyway, the point is that basically the Yushiro and Miharu are kind of rejecting rejecting. They're not just rejecting Kazuhiko. They're also rejecting Nishida. And yes,
You
so
could say that.
yes, I could say that. So yeah, I'm still not 100% sure about Nishida's plan. Okay, but it doesn't really matter to be honest. Did you feel like there were enough episodes? Or given that there were so many things happening, would you have preferred it if there were more episodes, but the same events, just more spread out? Or did you feel like this was the best?
This show could have benefited either A, from slightly more planning time, or B, 12 more episodes. Like, we actually, we just mentioned earlier that Mr. Wan hap- that Yushiro saving one of the mafia guys and thus getting in basically happens off screen. Uh, there are a lot of things like that where it
No,
just
no.
feels rushed.
I think
Or
we do see Yushiro saving He saves the shopkeeper from
okay.
from getting hit by a car
Okay.
under the lorry.
Yeah, a lot of things just go through fast, and it's blink and you'll miss it. Like for example, uh, at the end of the last flashback episode, you see that Miharu has sort of like gone catatonic and has lost herself. She eventually regains herself, but that she's sort of lost herself in her own memories and can't move or interact anymore. And all of a sudden, you have that episode, and then all of a sudden, it cuts to Yushiro and Miharu, the next episode, being in the Asian veins in this illegal immigrant district. And you're like, oh, okay, they're just here now, and wait, Miharu's like completely lost herself? What's going on?
Yeah.
There are various parts like that that very much speak to they were moving through this as fast as they could in order to get the story that they had done. Now, to its credit, it never has it never pulls an Ava thing where it's like, oh, we give up on telling the main story. Here's some characters talking to you. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically why I said that, because they didn't really cut anything out when it comes to the mechs. That is why I said that the most important thing for the creators of this story was the mechs. And that is also what I felt while reading those interviews and all that. This was all what was going to make this different from others.
I disagree somewhat. Like Bio Gundam was saying, the Japanese do not speak about their politics very much. It's something that's considered reserved to them, and this is a heavily political show with a lot of various themes and messaging and all that.
Yes, but even ignoring the interviews, then they didn't really cut anything out when it comes to the mech scenes and explaining what the fuck was going on, and spending a lot of time building up. Whereas when it comes to these, some of these characters, like it sort of happens at the last time, like Yushiro's sister becoming a Kai, and so
yes, that's very much just dropped in like the last 3 episodes. Suddenly, one of the characters realizes that she is a Kai too, and then in the very last episode, that gets integrated into the plot.
Yeah, so the selling point of this series was obviously going to be like, we are going to make realistic mechs and have realistic mech scenes with the story coming second.
I wouldn't say there's a story coming second, but yeah, in a very realistic setting, yes.
Right. That's like, for instance, that's the reason why I mentioned the TV news programs stuff. It's all about world building, the setting.
Yes.
Rather than the character story.
Yes. This is not a super character focused show. Although every character, like all of the Goa family, is fleshed out to a certain degree. Like you have Kiyotsugu Goa, who is
the brothers
maybe you could maybe say he's the most well-intentioned of the brothers, but he very much is someone who's just, well, if it's for science, I'll go along with it. And by the end, you can really tell that that's finally cut away at him as Kazukiyo just throws the little sister Misuzu into this robot for a test experiment and to reach Gasaraki.
Yes, I think we mostly get stuff with Kazuhiko, I would say, when it comes to the Goa family. With the guy you mentioned, the scientist with long hair, and the glasses guy not getting as much attention, and
no.
After
Yeah.
Kazuhiko, I would say Kazuhiko gets more attention than Yushiro.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning that, and you could say this somewhat undercuts the idea of like building mutual trust. The TA company that Goa serves in, uh, the characters are never really built beyond their superficial selves. Now, that's not to say that any one of them
Yes.
feels like they're poorly written or anything like that. They do feel like the way they are written, that they are real people and that they're not simple stereotypes, that there probably is more depth behind them, but we just don't know of it. It's just not shown to us and it never becomes relevant.
When it comes to the TA team, I felt that the reason why there were, I guess, there were too many women. um,
Well, this is anime. That
Yes.
can't be helped.
yes, yes. I mean, yeah. I think that's probably why they were there. Even though they were all right. I mean, as characters. And yeah, I think we didn't really. I mean, it started with them, but they kind of went into the background a bit.
They very much did
They lacked
go into the
agency.
background.
Yes.
Yeah, there's not tons of agency. Rinataka does end up looking out for Yushiro and searching for him once he goes missing.
Yes, best girl.
Both times. Yeah, I guess you could say. If you're not into the green-haired girl in plug suit.
Yeah, I mean, her design is good, but in terms of characterization, I think she's pretty worse, especially after she goes into her, I don't know, PTSD state or whatever.
To each their own. I did very much enjoy. There's not tons of Yushiro and Miharu getting to know one another, but partially because they're supposed to have known one another for some time, theoretically, past lives. But there's this implicit trust between them that I do really like. There's once, and the second to last episode, Miharu chooses to go back with Symbol for just a quick moment to say goodbye to the person that sort of took care of her and viewed her as a little bit more than a puppet. And she tells Yushiro, I will without a doubt come back. There's something I must do. And Yushiro just goes okay and believes her. Very much, I guess you could say they build on this idea of mutual trust. And it's sort of like a very quiet, sort of Japanese affection between them. Miharu is almost the perfect Yamato Nadeshiko in
She's
terms
a
of
Ray clone, come on.
I don't know if that's. You could say she's influenced. I don't know if it's entirely fair to call her exactly a clone, but you could say that. Like character design wise, yeah, a little bit.
Yes, more than a little, but yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really feel much about their romance, to be honest, if there was any.
Well, Bio Gundam, he left unfortunately, but he mentioned while we were talking a little that he quite enjoyed that. So I'm going to lean towards, since someone else also had my opinion. I'm going.
Yeah,
to
I don't believe in democracy, but yeah, I don't believe in democracy. So yeah,
yeah. Well,
I don't really know how many people.
There is democracy among the elites. It's called oligarchy.
Yeah. All right. So. And I guess what else is there to say? I guess it was kind of weird that some of the hairstyles, because like there were all these, especially the male characters with, military, I guess, proper hairstyles. So it was. I guess Yushiro is technically just a civilian, so he can grow
Yeah.
his hair out.
Yeah,
Still, I don't know. I mean, he could pass off as a girl, couldn't he?
yeah, he sort of could if you dressed him up the right way.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has that very stark Bishonen look to him, but like very much looks at you head on, and the character design almost looks like he's just looking at you the way you are, that without any prejudgment, that he's just sort of there staring at you.
Speaking of given that this story goes a lot into the geopolitics, they didn't really predict China, right?
No. China is basically treated as if it's a non-factor, even though by right it should be a major factor in the story. I watched before this another show called Brain Powered. It's an experimental show by Tomino, which has a lot more experimental faults than this show, but it's an interesting show. And that one also is geopolitical related by the end, and that one explicitly shows China as being like essentially just a bunch of like farmers and very poor people and what. Yeah, it's admittedly you have a slightly alternate history going on there, but it's not that crazy an alternate history. So I guess people at this time in the 90s, like, China was starting to become an up-and-comer, but I guess people didn't really understand how much China was on course to be the next superpower.
I mean, even with something more recent like Code Geass, China is just.
Well, that doesn't matter because Code Geass is an entirely alternate timeline.
Yeah,
and
but
they couldn't
still.
even decide,
Yeah,
and they couldn't even decide if China was communist or if it was feudal.
Yeah, but I guess still the bad guys there, or rather the major power there is basically the United States by another name. Yeah.
No, the Holy Britannian Empire is an.
Come on.
It occupies the territory of America.
It just happens.
Yes.
It just happens to be there.
But ideologically, it's entirely separate from America.
It's not about it's about power, not ideology, I guess.
I guess, but it's like it's this big absolutist monarchy, and whoever is the next monarch is like whoever survives the next wave of assassinations, Ottoman style. Nothing like America politically.
Yeah, I mean, it just happened to be there. Happened to be there, like basically. I don't know. I guess. I guess the Japanese still, or at least the otaku, who make this stuff, still have. I guess they're still butthurt, to put it bluntly, about having lost the war.
There is still this great amount of resentment because it's completely shaped their post-war constitution and everything. Like, every single one of the Axis powers, the U.S. came in and essentially, well, people controlling the U.S. rewrote the constitutions in those countries to essentially ban the previous political groups. This wasn't just with Nazism. Like, Italy has laws in the constitution against fascism against any fascist parties.
But I guess that the Italians and the Germans, they might be anti-American, but they're anti-American from the left rather than anti-American from the right.
Japan does have the anti-American from the left and from the right traditions.
Yes.
From the right tradition is that's the only difference, is that in Italy to a greater extent, and Germany totally, the right wing has been purged. Whereas in Japan, you still have this inherent right-wing feeling that still exists there. Now, you also have the left, who have essentially completely taken on this idea of pacifistic Japan, and we are absolutely against war, and have basically turned that Article 2, or whichever it is, of the
Article
Japanese
9.
Constitution, Article 9 of the Japanese
Yeah, but
Constitution,
to be honest,
into an idol.
I don't know if the left matters. I mean, the pacifist left anyway matters.
No, I think they definitely do. Like, from what I understand, the Democratic Party of Japan was more representative of them.
Yes, but I know.
And they came to power, like, in '08 for a couple years.
Yes, but it's just that. I mean, for the last, well, since the war, it's mostly been the Liberal Democratic Party.
Yes,
which is nice.
But the Liberal.
Yes.
Yeah, but the Liberal Democratic Party is very much mainstream conservative, which means that naturally they tend to be mostly influenced by big number go up, keeping GDP up, and very influenced by the left socially and keep getting dragged by
yes, that is true. Yes, I think basically I think their view is let's do all this military. Let's have a military, but let's just pretend it's not a military. Essentially, yeah. So that's that. What the hell did Kugutsu mean? I heard that term mentioned a few times.
Kugutsu? I think that might have been another term for Kai. There's actually a glossary in that.
Yes, I forgot to look at that, yes. Let me have a look at it as well.
I do think it was possibly just another term for Kai. There we are.
Is it in alphabetical order? Yeah, and I always found it a bit funny, like how in the series they had to change the JSDF, the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, to SSDF.
Yeah, apparently it stands for the Special Self-Defense Force. Apparently, like, I don't know, there's certain responsibilities have been added or something like that.
Yeah, it's a bit lame, to be honest. I mean, why couldn't they just call it the JSDF?
I don't know. Maybe someone thought it would be better to be slightly less on the nose. Yeah, let's see. Special Self-Defense Force, a force established specifically for the purposes of overseas deployment. Units from the Ground Self-Defense Force, Maritime Self-Defense Force, and Air Self-Defense Force can be incorporated into the Special Self-Defense Force depending on the demands of the situation. The English translation is the Japan Special Self-Defense Force. So yeah, it's supposed to be like the Self-Defense Force has been somewhat expanded in terms of its duties.
I see.
In between,
so I guess that is a reason why they call the special.
Yes. That I think that speaks to the nature of the show itself in terms of it will just throw in like little internal details and lore bits into it, and it's not going to really explain that to you. It's just sort of there. Yeah. It's a very it's full to the brim with little story details like that. I want to talk the anime direction overall. It wasn't like the most striking show I've ever seen, but it's exceptionally well. Exceptionally might be too strongly putting it, but I thought all the shot composition on whatnot was very well directed. Like a lot of modern anime, a lot of people have pointed out, characters tend to be very flat looking, and angles just sort of randomly chosen. This is not that show. This show has a lot of close-ups. They like doing sometimes like this, where they show half a face and they're just sort of grimacing or something like that. There are some shots, especially like at the very end, where it does almost look like movie caliber in terms of the direction. Again, we're not talking necessarily Ava levels here, but we are talking, I thought, very, very good quality. You can tell it's an experienced anime director.
The ending is certainly Eva quality, though.
Oh yes, very much so.
Yes. What did I feel about the direction? I think I probably enjoyed the most the first arc in Belgistan, I would say. I don't know. Afterwards, the mid part was a bit shit, and the ending after Nishima or Nishida, sorry. Yeah, I said Nishima because that sounds like Mishima.
Yeah.
Even though, as I said in the Discord server, Mishima would never allow himself to be caught alive, being such an old man. Yeah. So the direction, yeah. There was one I liked most of the battle scenes, but there was one which I did not like, which was the one where the Americans were storming the nerve center, whatever. The whole thing with the elevator.
Yeah.
I kind of I kind of didn't like that scene. I'm not sure why though, but
there are. I can sort of get it. There are parts where it's not as well to put together at the start, and there is a lot of ATA's leg gets shot off, and then they sort of have to figure out, well, how are we going to operate around this? I was fine with it. I'd say some of the geography at times in that fight initially could be a little confusing, but once they got into the elevator shaft itself and they were directly fighting with one another, and like the final part where Ataka acts as bait and Yushiro is able to take it down, works pretty well. And then they show Yushiro's mech, like.
I would have liked it if I had seen at least some of the TA members die once in a while. But by the way, did they ever explain why is it that I get it that Yushiro and Miharu are Kai, but what have the mechs, the TAs, got to do with the what are the Gasaraki or whatever the mechs from the past? Like what do they have in common? Do they explain that?
Yeah, the mechs themselves, they use the same artificial muscles that the Kugai does. And the idea is they're essentially a path towards recreating Kugais, towards creating artificial Kugais. And that's what both Symbol and the Goa are about.
But if they were both using the same muscles, then why is it that the Goa family had to go through like so much hardship in order to get a sample of the muscle? They
didn't know what they were using. It's possible Symbol was more advanced than them in recreating it.
Yes, and Symbol didn't know that they've also that the Goa family were also using the same.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that explains it. Maybe. What else is there to say? Let's see. Yeah, about the grain shortage again. I mean, was it really hegemonistic of the US to shut itself off? And I mean, I kind of felt like, isn't this kind of what you want for every country to shut itself off?
Well, from a strict America First perspective, you could say yes. That
No,
this is
but I
America
mean,
looking after itself.
yes, and it should look after itself, shouldn't it? And I also felt,
But the thing is, by doing so in this case, it was dooming much of the rest of the world, and that's why Japan was.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I get it, but I kind of felt like Nishida was
Yeah,
trying to have his cake and eat it too, because
yeah, I guess you could say it muddles the fact that it turns out in such a way does muddle the message a little. Yes.
I mean, shouldn't he want the U.S. to shut itself down? And I guess he believes that if the U.S. shut itself down, only Japan would fall, but the U.S. wouldn't
Yeah.
fall. So he wanted both to fall instead.
No, very much the implication seems to be that America does technically have enough grain to go around, but it would have to go through severe rationing if it chose to export. Therefore, it was choosing just to not export and essentially keep its affluence going
Yeah.
and let the rest of the world out to dry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was another prediction, I guess, which the story made, which kind of turned out to be. I mean, there really isn't something like a grain shortage in the US or anywhere else in the West.
Well, yeah, this was very much based off of. I very much got the feeling they make a mention that it
Global
was
warming.
based off of. Yeah, it's global warming. Yeah, they global warming was a big deal at the time. There was a lot more feeling that it was going to lead to all these huge, gradually worsening, like sort of economic and really weather patterns and climate. And that hasn't really turned out to be the case.
I see. So yeah, they fell for the meme, I guess.
Yeah, they did fall for me.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they kind of did it more from. I wouldn't say an environmental, because there's in some old shows you do get kind of an environmentalist. Like for instance,
Message,
yeah.
but this isn't really preachy on that. No,
Yes, no, but yeah.
it's just sort of name dropped.
He just takes it for granted, I guess. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. I also didn't buy that the U.S. opening up its grain supplies would not make it hegemonic anymore. So
yeah, that is definitely the weakest part of what Nishida was doing. Nishida was basically saying the fact that the U.S. chose to back down at all was something of a example of it stepping down from hegemony. Again, I wouldn't be as definitive on that. You could definitely say that. Well,
it's not clear.
They're doing that for they're doing it for now. They can still really push the issue later, but I think part of that, this was obviously made pre 9/11. There's a lot more trust in good feeling between countries and in countries being willing to do the right thing once it's shown to them. There really isn't that ever-present, like, complete cynicism that people tend to have today towards the major countries, where they expect the major countries to do everything wrong because it's wrong and because they like doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, because the first thing that I thought when I heard of Nishima's plan, I thought, well, if you're going to go that hard on the United States, well, don't be surprised if they like literally fucking nuke you. Something.
Yeah, and that's sort of what they try to do. They try to assassinate him and blow up their whole building, and blow up the whole building where they were keeping all.
No, but I mean like an actual vote or something.
Yeah, but Nishida's counting on the fact that such a thing would essentially estrange the U.S. from every one of its quote-unquote allies, and I think he's correct on that. Like, imagine if doesn't matter what, but imagine if, say, I don't know, Japan just started having friendlier talks with China, agreed to some new free trade agreement, and then dumped a little bit of its debt on the.
Yeah, but I guess in this
would the
case,
US
China is kind of it's kind of irrelevant in this case.
Yes.
So I guess Nishida must have thought that I don't know, the Europeans were going to do something about the US. I mean,
Yeah.
what the hell are the Europeans? Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, the Europeans were, I guess you could say, slightly more independent-minded there. I think Francois Mitterrand wasn't that, had been French PM fairly recently then, and he was more of an independent-minded guy. Yeah, we tend to view the Europeans as just puppets that will, to put it crudely, take the screwing and like it.
Yes.
But that wasn't as much the view back then. That they were definitely being controlled by America, but that they still had more autonomy.
I guess the reason why it came to mind was because basically after the US left Afghanistan, the British government asked them to delay the retreat because they couldn't get everyone out in time.
Well, the problem there.
Yes,
oh.
but basically, as soon as the US left, there wasn't any choice for any of the other allies but to leave because they frankly do not matter. Whatever the US does, they had no choice but to follow, I guess.
Well, yeah, they didn't have. It's not like their militaries are a lot smaller. They're not nearly as good as power projection and all those sorts of technical terms. It would have been a lot harder and a lot more costly for them to keep up any sort of presence on their own.
Right. So I think, is there anything else you want to say about Gasaraki?
I'd say overall, it's one of the most interesting anime that you're ever going to find. It is completely unique. If you're very interested in like a hard-boiled political thriller or a show that very much sucks you into the particulars of a very traditional Japanese feel and can get sort of intense in times, a little bit like a horror movie, I think you'll be quite attracted to this show, and I think you'll quite enjoy this show. If you're someone that's just sort of looking for action or a hyper-dramatic show, this is not for you. This is a stoic show. This is a stoic show to a T. And if you can get into that, and if you can get into some of the high-minded stuff, and if you're very much into sort of like the aesthetic feel of Japanese culture, I think you'll very much enjoy this show.
Right. I think I'm going to rate this show a 6 out of 10.
I'd give it an 8.
Yeah. Well, then again, you also liked the fourth Rebuild movie, so.
No, I qualifyingly like that. I'd give it like a 6.5. That movie.
All right. I mean, I don't know. I would give it more like a 3, but yeah. So, as for this show, Gasaraki, I guess if you're looking for... there's a lot of talking, so... I don't know. There's a lot of, I guess, tell rather than show.
Yeah.
And... So, and the characters, I mean, there's a lot of characters for 25 episodes. Some of the secondary characters turned out to be unexpectedly interesting, such as Nishida, of course. But the main cast, I don't know, was kind of lacking. The premise is pretty unique. Mechs in the near future. or the near past, if you will.
Near past now.
Yes, but I don't know. I didn't feel. I think basically that Anime Snob's review was correct. Now, Snob cast too much about presentation over the premise. So he basically thinks that because the presentation and the directing are not good enough, it didn't have the influence which it might have had.
Well, the thing is, this isn't. You could say it's almost like a play in some ways, in that it's not trying to be very in your face.
It is pretty in your face when it comes to Nishida's ideals, for instance.
Right. But in terms of like pure directing style,
yes,
it will let you get into things when something's very unusual is happening. Like it'll play that up when something supernatural is going on. But other than that, it has a straight, almost documentary style.
Yes,
it feels a little like Tomino in that capacity. Yoshiyuki Tomino, director of Gundam. If you're fine with that style, then you'll be absolutely fine.
I would say
fine with that style.
Yes,
I'm not gonna like.
I would say that Tomino's characters have more character, to be honest. Even though I criticize him sometimes, his characters have more. They're more like anime characters, if you will. Yeah. What else does he say? I think if you're interested in politics, you will probably find it interesting. But I guess it's more I found it more interesting to think about it and talk about it than what was actually shown. Some of the mech scenes were, I guess, they tried to make it realistic, which in some sense might make it boring, but in others it might make it more interesting. I guess you would see less of the themes reflected in the battles because it's not like I don't know, like a duel between two Gundams or something. If you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So you don't have that, I guess, almost nightly.
Well, no, you don't. This is very much a show
a more modern,
treating
yes,
the TAs as
modern
basically
weapons.
giant tanks.
Yes, so it's
modern weapons.
For modern
these are
yes.
Yeah, although there is something of a samurai theme towards it, it's heavily played down.
Yes, it's all about winning. Like you're not going to win because like you have the that's the thematically right thing, or because it shows something narratively. It's I guess, which is fine.
It's a show going for full realism. Really.
Yes, which I don't know. When it comes to mecha, I prefer more stuff like, say, Gunbuster or Eva.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm perfectly fine with that, and I'm perfectly fine with this. I think there's a place for both.
Well, I don't know. Is there? I'm not sure. I kind of felt like if you're going to show a realistic war, you don't really need the fucking mechs. You can just show a realistic war with just.
But then you can't get into the supernatural stuff as well. But
did you really need the mechs? The mechs for the. The real.
Well,
mechs,
yes,
yeah.
plot wise, because the only reason Yushiro, this civilian, is even being assigned to this random TA team is because he works on the mechs and is a mech pilot only because the mech is related to the whole dance and the bringing of Gasaraki.
But at that point, you might as well abandon the real robot stuff and make it a proper Super Robo show. Uh, yeah. Well, anyway, I think we have talked long enough about this. You must be tired as well, or maybe you're not. But I think, unless I think no, I think you already said your final thoughts.
Yeah, I'd I'd say this much: if the show interests you, I highly recommend it. If it doesn't interest you, it's not going to change your mind.
Yeah. So whatever. That means. So yeah, let's end this thing. If I can figure out how to stop recording. Stop streaming. Yeah. So bye bye. Get out.
What, you're just going to mimic AA?
Yes, that's an old tradition here.
Fine then.